real conversation, and some hard truths. Gangs, drugs, and guns. Giving a voice to those willing to sacrifice. We have stories that need to be told. We have lessons that need to be taught. Protect and serve. Welcome to The Quiet Professional. All right, welcome back, everybody. Nathan Romas with you again. Today, we are going to be discussing leadership, legalities, and SWAT. And for that, I've got Inspector Kevin Sear on the program. Kevin has over 20 years with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. He's worked in areas on both sides of the house, from patrol to major crimes, drugs, intel and organized crime, and community policing. Currently, Kevin is the officer in charge of the Lower Mainland District's Integrated Emergency Response Team, or SWAT for layman terms. Kevin has a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics from St. Francis Xavier University, a Certificate of Police Leadership from Dalhousie University, and his Master of Laws in Criminal Law and Procedure from Osgoode Hall Law School, which is at York University, if I'm correct.
You got it.
So, welcome, Kevin.
Thanks very much for having me.
So I think we were just kind of talking before hitting the record here, but we're going to get into a paper that you were a part of, and it's comparing Canadian and U.S. SWAT teams, and we'll just use the term SWAT because I think it's the most common vernacular. But before we get into that and some other things, I want to know about you. So can you tell us about yourself, where you come from, and how you got into this crazy world?
Yeah, sure thing. So I grew up on the east coast of Canada in New Brunswick, and sort of always wanted to be a police officer. I wanted some sort of action job, and kind of, in my 8-year-old head, always want to do something with, special operations. That's kind of just what I had in mind. I mean, of course, it didn't mean anything at that point. And the way that started to materialize, or I guess crystallize through high school, was a career with the RCMP. I was from New Brunswick. The RCMP was the only police force I knew, but I wanted to be on a SWAT team. Like, that's what I wanted to do. I didn't know a lot about the military at the time. If I knew then what I know now, I probably would have went that route first. But at the time, 1995, military was in shambles. They just came off the Somalia affair. They were in the position then that policing is today, sort of vilified in the media. And that drove me away from military. So I wanted to be a police officer. But back then, man, it was hard. It's not like today where, you apply and they're glad to have you. It's like there was a high rejection rate. So you always had to have a backup plan. So my backup plan was I went to university and studied mathematics. I started in physics, but by about third year, I was enjoying my math courses more than my physics courses. And believe it or not, there's a ton of career opportunities for math majors, which I didn't know about. So while I was finishing my math degree, I was applying to the RCMP for the second time. They had rejected me for the first time. And I think I applied in my second year of university. In my fourth year, I was going through my second application process. And at the end of university, I had three options. I could have gone to do my master's in software engineering. I had a nice scholarship to do that. I had a job offer as an actuary, which they make a lot of money doing financial analysis. And the Mounties called and said, "Hey, we got a spot for you at Depot. What do you want to do?" So I had already started my master's in software engineering and left my books on the prof's desk. And it was like early September before the term had started. We were just doing some pre-work, and sent him an email, said, "Hey, man, I'm going to be a cop. See you later." And I just wanted to go drive a police car and drive with lights and sirens and fight bad guys. So that's what I did.
So, wow, those are quite the opposite ends of the spectrum. I would say an actuary or software engineer to, going out and being in the thick of things and driving the car. What do you think? Do you think most people kind of have that ability to be two things at once, or is that just something that has actually been a part of your life? Have you always been an outdoors person and kind of wanted to be out there?
Well, it's funny. I just am interested in a lot of different things, and it's a bit of a curse because I'm never satisfied. I'm always thinking, oh, I should go do that other thing. And, I'll give you an example. I've got my dream job right now. I get to work on one of the busiest SWAT teams and biggest SWAT teams in North America with just an incredible group of guys. And, sometimes my phone would ring. I was like, hey, there's this job coming open. And, it's researching policy or, analyzing business structures of what we do. It's like, ooh, that sounds kind of cool. And I get enticed by it, and it usually fades pretty quickly. But I wish I was one of those guys that was only interested in one thing, but I'm not. And it's the bane of my existence.
Well, I think it's like it speaks to just having a high drive, right? And you're never, like you said, you're never satisfied. So you always kind of want to see things through to the end, but you're always looking for that next opportunity. That's kind of the people we look for, I would imagine, on this job. I would think that's what recruiting, those are some of the main people they want. You don't want someone who just comes in as like, yeah, I just kind of want to do this and kind of want to be out there.
Well, that's it. Like, that's what attracted me to policing and the RCMP in particular. I think the RCMP's got a few disadvantages, but one of our competitive advantages in the policing universe is just the variety and spectrum of jobs you can do. So, in my 22 years now, I've done patrol, I've done drug work, I've done criminal intelligence, I've done major crime, I've done child sex offenses, and I've settled into emergency response team. But I've done all those different things without sacrificing seniority, whilst pursuing promotional opportunities and while building a pension. What other job can you do that in? And I think in any large agency, you have that diversity of career opportunity. It's pretty cool.
Did you have any family or friends that were kind of going in this direction as well, or somebody that might have pushed you in this direction?
Zero. I cannot trace where this came from. I have no clue.
Do you have any family currently on the job?
Nope.
Oh, nothing. Okay.
Nothing, man. Like I'm an outlier. And
there you go.
Yeah, I know. I just remember being in grade 3 and the police car drove by and I waved at him and he waved back and I ran home to tell my mom, and that seemed to seal the deal.
Do you think a lot of this drive for this, and you're saying like you want it to be in some sort of special ops or SWAT type role, is that just like from maybe the movies or cartoons you watched as you were growing up?
Yeah, I remember my mom buying me a Time Life book about special operations. And there's like a chapter on the Navy SEALs and a chapter on the Green Berets and a chapter on the SAS. And I could, if I saw that book today, I would know what every page was. Like I just read it all the time. It was just, I'm interested in a lot of things, but that just captivated me, like just as a kid, like, 9-year-old Kevin would be pretty happy right now with what we get to do every day. So,
so can you kind of walk us a bit through your career? So, I mean, you've been in a number of units. Where have you spent your time? Like, is it across Canada, one province? And walk us through just some of the jobs that you have done.
Sure. So I've done it all in British Columbia. I'm from New Brunswick. I'll never go back east again. There's so much opportunity in British Columbia, and the weather's quite agreeable, et cetera, et cetera. So my first posting was a place called New Hazelton. So the way they do it in Depot is you show up, you sign up to the RCMP, you don't know where you're going. I think they're starting to do pre-posting agreements now, but you sign the dotted line saying, I am willing to go anywhere in Canada. And they don't tell you, I think for about, of the 6-month training program at Depot, it's not until like month 4 or 5 that you find out where you're going. And it's a big day. So they give you a form at about month 3, because you haven't washed out yet. Say, where are your top picks? And I'm like, well, I'm like I'm like 22 years old, single. I want to go to a big city. So I think I wrote down like Nanaimo and Kelowna and Victoria, like nice, super nice places. And posting day comes and they gather you all in a room and they start reading out where you're going. And I'm from New Brunswick. And so they say, Sir, like, Corporal, you're going to New Hazelton. I'm like, well, that wasn't on my list. So I look over to a guy in my troop who was from British Columbia, and he just shrugs his shoulders. Like he doesn't know. He's like, I don't know where that is either. I'm like, oh man, that's not good. So there's this little saying, if your posting starts with New, Fort, or Prince, you're kind of in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started looking on the map, and I was looking around, Kelowna, which is very middle of the province. And my facilitator, the corporal, he starts laughing at me. He's like, brother, you're going to have to look further north on the map for that. So, I kept going up. So New Hazel is a very, very small town. It's like, I think it was like 3 small towns and then 7 reserves. Huge area, 9 police officers, like total. So we worked a lot on my own. Like that was back before we had backup policy. We used to do a lot of stuff on our own. You wouldn't dream of doing that today.
Mm-hmm.
It was a terrible place for them to put a single guy, but I ended up meeting my wife up there because she was working in the next detachment over. So we've been married now 20 years. But the work is fantastic, because it's not like in the big city where you go to a big file and the detectives swoop in and do the investigation. Man, there are no detectives. Like you're it.
Mm-hmm.
Like one of my first calls was, like a multiple stabbing. And I mean, from Edmonton, like what 1-year constable is going to, get to do that? Like no one, like you're not going to take that.
Yeah.
There's no one else there. So it's a fantastic place to learn. I started handling a lot of confidential informants and doing a lot of drug work, which is, I really like that stuff as well. And just sort of cut my teeth on a lot of different things. So I was there 2.5 years. It was a limited duration posting. And then we got our transfer to Vernon, which is, I think that place has maybe like 60 or 70 police officers. No, maybe not even that big. But it's a mid-sized city.
Yeah. And
I did patrol there for 1.5 years. And then I switched over to the drug section.
And when you went to drugs, that just keeps you in the lower mainland?
No, this was in Vernon. So it's still the interior of the province.
Okay.
Yeah. So we had a 3-member drug section.
And when you're working in drugs, because there's so many units that kind of work in this realm, but when you're working in drugs, is that specific groups, like specific organized crime groups, or is it just like your local drug dealers? Do you have a certain type of focus?
Yeah, we were primarily focused on just the low level guys. At the time as well, there was a big organized crime presence in grow ops. So this organized crime ring would take recent immigrants, buy them a house. They would use them as like a straw man purchaser to get the loan. And then they'd be forced to, turn over crops in their basement and cause just massive damage to the house. And every year we'd have a few people die from fires, it seemed.
Jeez.
So we targeted that quite a lot. Actually, at one point, we led the province in like just our 2-officer section. Me and my partner, Brian, we led the province in real estate seizures.
Oh, yeah.
Under Civil Forfeiture Act. Yeah, just because we just got into this group and we're able to crack the code and just rolled them up big time. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, and so where do you go from drug unit?
I popped over to major crime. Also still staying in Vernon. We worked a big file. You can actually Google it. There was a gang named the Greeks. I mean, this is like a small town. Vernon's got 50,000 people. And this organized crime group got entrenched. I say organized crime, but they were kind of small time, but they were so entrenched and so emboldened that they just started murdering people. And I think, if memory serves, we were investigating, I think 5 to 7 murders, something in that realm, all connected to this group. And it was a massive undertaking. We had a bunch of resources surged from outside to help us take these guys down. It was a big wiretap operation, undercover stuff. It was a very big file. So I was really lucky to get involved in that one.
Wow. So from there, you eventually kind of end up in doing the ERT, which is SWAT. How do you go from doing these heavy investigation units to the operational side again?
well, I might disagree that SWAT is not operational. I might not choose that word, but or sorry, that the major crime stuff's not operational.
Yeah,
but I know what you mean. Street level, tip of the spear sort of thing. So I actually went down to. I got a promo to Surrey. I was working Surrey major crime, and my particular expertise was writing search warrant applications. I did a lot of them, like hundreds of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I was arguing with Crown Counsel over something once. And I know she was wrong and I was right. I knew it. But she dismissed me by saying, Kevin, if you'd gone to law school, you'd understand this. And so I got so mad that I went home and I applied to law school. So that's how I ended up doing my law degree at Osgoode. So whilst I was doing that, it was a heavy lift. Like it was a full-time master's program while working full-time with a 2-year-old at home. Just,
Jeez.
I don't know why I did it. I don't even know how. I don't have any memory of that. It was just awful. But I went to a uniform community policing role that there just wasn't any overtime. So that's how I managed that. When I was finishing that, I'm like, man, like what's next for me in my career? And because I had done in those smaller detachments, I had been a part-time SWAT guy. Like, you do your regular job and then you do part-time. So I'd dipped my toe a bit in that water. I had the qualifications, like as in I had gone to the course to go to the full-time team. But I was a corporal and I didn't have the KSAs. Like the number of calls these guys were doing and the skill level they were operating at was far beyond what I could have provided as a supervisor.
At this time, you've already done the selection course and gone through like a bunch of training. You're working part-time as ERT or SWAT?
That's right. Yes. Yeah. As a collateral duty team. So like all over the province, there's a full-time team down in like the Vancouver area, but everyone else is just part-time. Like you do it off the side of your desk, you get your training hours, you go to call-outs, but other than that, you're doing your regular patrol job. So I'd done that with the North District team. And then but I had my little check mark of, hey, this guy is SWAT trained.
Mm-hmm.
So when I finished my law degree, I actually emailed staffing and said, hey, I want to resign my rank, demote myself, and go to the full-time team as a constable. And they're like, oh, like you just finished law school and you want to go do that? I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
And career planning is not my strong suit. The boss there actually is like, hey, Kevin, I could use you as an NCO working in the training section. We've got some policy problems that we want to deal with. We've got some scheduling challenges. So they took me over as a corporal. And I was able to, be fully operational, do calls whilst doing the training section stuff. And then I promoted to sergeant in that training job.
Okay. So once you're sergeant, are you still operational, we'll say, but like out there with the team, like on the ground, or now are you more in a command structure?
At that point, no, I was still operational. Of course, it's limited. There's different demands on the job, but one of the basic tenets of our entire team, even to this day, I mean, that was back in 2015, 14, something like that. Even to this day, is everyone on the team is fully operational at all times. You have to keep up your physical standards. You have to keep up your shooting standards. There's no just admin guy.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone is fully operational at all times.
Wow. So what's the workload like for you now?
As far as our unit's call volume?
Yeah.
Yeah. Last year we hit 230 calls. I think of that, we do about 5 hostage takings and kidnappings per year. And we respond to them. Obviously, we don't do them, but we respond to them. Yeah. We do a lot of planned warrant, like search warrants, and we do a lot of barricades. That would comprise the majority of our work.
Do you have a big component that takes you out to the water at all? Do you do any kind of operations out there?
We do. So because we're a federal police agency, we have the Marine mandate. British Columbia's got the world's second largest passenger ferry system. And you can actually read terrorist manuals and publications calling for attacks on these ferries. Mm-hmm. We've got some, Vancouver and Delta container ports. We've got migrant vessels that come in. We haven't seen one in years. We've got, cross-border drug smuggling. So yeah, we do have a full marine armed shipboarding capability.
And do you overlap a lot in your training with the U.S.? I'd imagine there'd be a big component with them.
We do, yes. Some of our major training partners are U.S. agencies.
Okay. So can you talk a bit about some of the different roles that SWAT might take part in? Because I think people have a lot of misconception. They think it's just kicking doors in and dealing with terrorism. But you actually post a lot of stuff online when it comes to the work that you do, from negotiating to you do a lot of like high angle rescues. Maybe you can explain what that is a bit. And then I imagine you even take part in like training other police officers. So you guys fill a lot of roles. Can you just talk about some of those?
Sure. I think, maybe the best way to say it is, why does SWAT exist? And it exists because there's a need for specialist police officers to be able to accomplish missions that are outside of the capacity of regular patrol or conventional policing units to do safely. And that's not, a cut against these other conventional units. Is they give my unit like hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to buy equipment. We've got a lot more training time. We just have the luxury of being able to prepare for those missions. And there's not many of them. So it makes more sense to consolidate that expertise into a single unit. That's the only reason we do it. We always say we're specialized, but we're not special.
Mm-hmm.
We just have the luxury of time and resources that have been given to us. So, we fulfill this public safety mandate, and we look at that from a very broad perspective of it's like our job is to save lives. And, of course, our primary concern is to save, innocent people from being victimized of crime. That's our primary function. We also want to just keep police officers safe, but we also want to keep bad guys safe. And especially we deal with a lot of people in mental health crisis. They're not actually bad guys.
Mm-hmm.
They're dangerous and they're in dangerous situations, but that doesn't make them a criminal. And we are very serious about how we deal with that. For example, we'll deal with someone, who's an armed and barricaded, firing rounds off in their house, so they're armed with a firearm. We'll either negotiate them out. Sometimes we'll gas them out. Sometimes you have to use a bit of force to safely mitigate that threat. But then they go and get the help they need. They're not in jail for anything. We'll never see them again. So we know that it's like, if we can deal with this guy properly, we're not going to see him again. He's not a bad person, just some things lined up poorly for him in his life.
Yeah. Well, and I guess maybe you could compare it to some doctors might have a bone saw and you guys are a scalpel, right? Like you got certain tools for certain jobs. You can't just have patrol go to everything. But that does kind of bring me to one point where, and we have this debate here, even in our service, is there's kind of patrol and then there's SWAT, but there's nothing in between. So do you think, is there room for something in the middle there? Because, and I ask that because there's a lot of times where we might have one team working and they're busy on a warrant or some other high level event. And now somebody else needs help. We need help with a high risk traffic stop, or, some other shooting comes in and, you need some sort of elevated level of training at this. Otherwise it's just general patrol showing up and you get a great range of people in general patrol. So do you think there's room for something in between there? Like a tier 2, maybe we'll call it, kind of like you would see in the military?
Yeah. So, okay. This used to be how things were broken down, was that SWAT was very much a light switch. It was either on or off. And the threshold to turn it on was very high. It was high because it was really expensive. It was disruptive for everyone's units to get their part-time SWAT guys called out. And the SWAT team used to be a one-trick pony. We would come, for example, if you're a drug section or a narcotics detective, you have a warrant, you want SWAT to do this search warrant because the guys are armed. We were going to do one thing. We were going to do a dynamic entry. So we're going to breach the door, throw in some flashbangs, run through the house super fast to overtake it. We might light the couch on fire with the flashbangs. You don't know. Put the guy in cuffs, hand him off to you, walk away, and you're not going to get any notes, right? Like you're not going to get any reports. We're probably going to cause excessive damage, and our ability to articulate the necessity of our entry will be questionable at best. So what happens when you have that kind of service? People don't call you because you start creating sure, we mitigated the physical risk, but we created all sorts of investigational risk. And then the organization doesn't like us to be deployed because we create organizational risk because now we're getting sued for causing all that damage. I feel like we have evolved quite a bit from that on-off switch to now to be a dimmer switch, where if you call me with a problem and say, Kevin, I've got this problem, it's beyond my unit's ability to handle safely. I have a lot of different strategies that we can apply to do that. So by spreading out the spectrum of what SWAT can do, I think you mitigate some of that gap that you're talking about. The other thing we've seen, I think, over the last 20 years is an increase in capability of patrol officers. The biggest capability increase has been carbines.
Yeah.
The second capability increase has been extended range impact weapons. So either beanbag shotguns or a 40 mil or 37 mil launcher. I suppose a third one would be, CEWs, so tasers. The patrol officer today has just got a ton more ability than when I started. You just didn't have that stuff. Like it didn't exist. It was unfathomable. That said, that stopgap or that carryover that you're talking about would probably be referenced as like a containment team. So you get some high risk armed and barricaded. You're going to deploy your containment team, and they just have a higher level of training of just tactics. But even those tactics, of dealing with the initial stages of these critical incidents should not be, in my opinion, above the realm of a patrol officer. Like the most dangerous thing to a criminal is a squared away patrol cop.
Mm-hmm.
Patrol officers do they do far more police work than I ever do or SWAT ever does. Like we get called for a very niche set of circumstances.
Yeah.
But patrols, like the true policing, that's real policing in my view.
Well, and it seems like the biggest difference is training. The amount of training, the time to do the training. It's hard as frontline to even get time off from your squad because you're either running at minimums or, maybe courses just aren't available all the time. But the big difference is the training and having that capability to contain those initial threats, we'll say.
Yeah, this bothers me because it's an inability of police agencies to differentiate between what is cheap and what is expensive, right?
Mm.
And they feel like training is expensive. And it is expensive. You have to make different resourcing decisions. So, maybe if you don't have enough people, where are your priorities? Are they, your boutique community outreach programs, which are important, but if you're sacrificing training for your frontline officers, is it more important than that? I'm not sure. That's a decision each agency has to make, but they approach training patrol officers as if it's too expensive. You hear it all the time. It's too expensive. There's too many of you. Okay, let's go ask, some of the United States agencies out there,
mm-hmm.
how expensive training looks in hindsight. Now that they've had these, just massive incidents that spawn months of protests. Really, how expensive is that, right? So training is expensive up until the moment is cheap. And the example I use is my ammo budget for my unit is $400,000 a year
mm-hmm.
on an $18 million budget. Okay, that's for 63 officers. That's expensive. And it's expensive right up until the moment one of my guys, and I don't know which one it's going to be, has to take a hostage rescue shot where a guy has a human shield and the officer's got maybe a 4-inch available target. Oh, and by the way, he's doing it on night vision.
Yeah.
Now, 400,000 is very, very cheap.
Yeah.
So I just don't buy that. I don't buy the reasoning behind having poorly trained frontline officers. That's where all your organizational risk is. Almost all of it's there.
Yeah.
When was the last time you had something, when was the last time your detective bureau did something so bad that it landed you on the front page? Unless you're mishandling informants or something like that, or, lying in search warrant applications, that's not where your risk is.
Yeah. And I totally agree with that. Maybe that kind of takes us right on to the paper that we were going to get into, talking about the comparison of Canadian and U.S. paramilitary units. Can you kind of start with just how this paper came to be, and how it all kind of came together?
Yeah, well, the genesis of the paper was on the critical incident commander course, which every SWAT team commander in Canada has to take, or almost all. There's some exceptions, but all the major teams do it. A guy who's an inspector from Victoria Police, Colin Brown, who's one of the smartest guys I've ever met, gave this talk on militarization of police. And essentially it's like, hey, all that talk down in the States about militarization of police, it's not applicable in Canada. And here's the reasons why it's not applicable in Canada. And so then I took, that seed and worked with a professor at a Memorial University. And we expanded. I think, did I co-wrote that with someone? I can't remember.
Yeah.
Do a bunch of these.
Yeah. And this one, I think you said there was maybe a couple people on.
I can't remember. I'd have to look at it. That's kind of embarrassing.
Oh, that's all right. Just talking about how this kind of came together, though.
Yeah. So
you're saying Colin Brown?
Yeah. So Colin Brown started, but really, I thought that it was important to have something with academic rigor behind it to counteract the prevailing argument that the police were somehow fundamentally flawed in pursuing a militarized version of itself. And all of the academic writers tend to be left-wing, sort of left-leaning, like by far, especially in the criminology space. A lot of the things that they were writing, it's like they've never been on an op in their life. Like, what are they talking about? And you can just see this, I won't say ignorance, but I mean, there's no really better word for it, just percolating through a lot of the academic discourse on this subject. And I wanted to counteract that. But I feel that police do a bad job of this. We're not engaged in the spaces where these decisions and opinions are being made and formed and decisions are being made. And we need to be better engaged in it. And that the arena of those ideas is in academic journals. So it's like, okay, let's roll up our sleeves and write something that can be published.
Yeah, and I 100% agree. I think ignorance is the best word. And a lot of the time people say things and they're not challenged on it, right? Like you're saying, they kind of operate in a certain space, and whether it's just disinterest in going in that space, or we're afraid to go in that space, somebody has to go in there and say, like, hey, what you're saying is wrong, and here are the reasons why. It's backed by these numbers, this data, these academic papers, whatever it might be, and also personal experience, which I think is the biggest part that's missing from a lot of what is said. I mean, these are the people that speak on, CBC, CTV, and get their voice out there. They're the ones that are heard. We don't say anything as police. Well, then what's the public left to think, right? So some of the stuff that you had in this paper was really good, and I'll figure out a way to get this linked so that people can look at it. I'll have to work with you on this. So one of the things you were talking about was the increased standardization in training, specialization, and protocols between Canada and the U.S. So can you kind of flesh out some of that? And I have a few stats here that I'll bring up, but I'll let you kind of start with what's the difference between Canada and U.S. when it comes to the standardization of things like training and protocols.
Yeah. Do you mind if I hit one quick topic first? Because you said it and it kind of just like this light bulb went off. You talk about those opinions that are formed in a vacuum of real life context. And I'll give you an example. So most of the militarization work started from a guy named Peter Kraska, who's a professor, a criminology guy down in the States. And in the 80s, he started hanging out with some SWAT teams and wrote some papers about it. And one of his big complaints is how SWAT teams were proliferating. And he's like, look, they proliferated, it was like X number of teams in 1982. And, it increased 4,000% from, until the year 2000. It's like, in the absence of context, that sounds really, that's very alarming. It's like, no, zero SWAT teams. It was a new thing in the 70s and 80s. No one had them. It became an industry standard, and all police forces are obligated to follow industry standards. Look what happened to the RCMP when everyone got carbines and the RCMP was too slow in rolling their carbine out. They got charged under the Canada Labor Code, and they got convicted under the Canada Labor Code, and they got fined $1 million. That's organizational risk. You can't breach industry standards. So Krask is making this conclusion that this proliferation of SWAT teams is evidence of evil militarization. And is actually his basic premise is a sound one. He says, listen, if you go to a country and you can't tell the difference between the police and the military, that's probably not a great place to be. And I agree with him on that. That's not wrong. But that police agencies have SWAT teams and that they are proliferating is not, in my view, evidence or does not support that conclusion that we're on that trend. So you talk about increased standardization. I think you have to look at the fundamental differences in how policing is provided in the States versus Canada. In Canada, there's like 180 police agencies total, right? The U.S. has 8 times our population. You would expect them to have, 8 times the number of police agencies. They don't. They have 100 times the number of police agencies. They have 18,000 police agencies. Most of them are really, really small.
Yeah.
I kind of laugh because, I forget the percentage. I think it's like something like 75% have under 25 officers.
So I have this here.
Oh, good.
So
Better prepared than me.
This is one of the stats that I wanted to bring up. So they have 18,000, roughly 18,000 law enforcement agencies. 49% of that are less than 10 officers. Less than 10 officers. Only 14% are greater than 49 officers, which I think is the more shocking stat. So the vast majority of police services down there are like, 20, 30 people, give or take, which is pretty surprising. When you look at Canada, though, like you're saying, there's roughly 176 municipal services, which police about 64% of the population. So theirs is like every small town you go to, you're getting a new sheriff, a new policy, a new standard right across, everywhere down the highway. So I could see that fragmentation there.
Well, and that was actually, if you look at the Ferguson, Missouri riots, the DOJ did a big analysis afterwards, and that was one of the conclusions they said. I think they had like 50 agencies show up, and they're like, they all have different deployment protocols, different equipment, different command structures. They can't talk to each other on the radio. Something like that. I mean, it just can't happen in Canada. There isn't 50 agencies around to come to a file.
Yeah.
It just doesn't exist. You're going to get maybe 3 or 4, maybe.
Well, and one of the things I remember seeing was the attack on Parliament Hill. And when the guy went running in and they had all the people responding, all the services, but there were people showing up in plain clothes and just have like a tack vest on that says police on the back or whatever their unit might be. And for me, like, and I know the training that we get, but it's like, if somebody shows up in plain clothes and I'm like, I don't know if you're a police officer, and I'm in full uniform, like, you're getting treated as a threat. So I could see the U.S., like, what a complete shit show that would be. 50 agencies showing up and people dressed in all kinds of things and armed all different ways in a place where, maybe they were allowed open carry there. Like, you really don't know who's who in this whole debacle, right?
It is. I can't imagine operating in that environment. And here's the other thing we need to map onto this is that policing in the States is much harder than in Canada. It's much more violent. So for every one police officer in Canada shot and killed, they have like 50.
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about how the United States has increased police militarization, which, by the way, what does that even mean, militarization? Like, people lament, they pound their fists on the table if the police get quote unquote military grade equipment. It's like anyone who's ever served in the military will tell you that is not a glowing endorsement of the equipment, right? It's it's like made by the lowest bidder. It's made to be super robust, but like, what does that even mean? And what about that makes it inherently bad? Again, it's like, it's a shallow argument to drive towards the conclusion that, hey, you do want to be able to tell the difference between police and military. That's a good thing to strive for. But the fact that we use a common piece of equipment in a completely different context,
yes,
is silly. I'll give you an examples. Once, you can look at this in the news. Our team dropped a 40 millimeter multi-launcher out of the back of a truck. We found it, but the back gate broke, and he paid some penance for that. But it's in the media. It's kind of a obviously suboptimal thing, and it's never happened before or since. But people are human, and things happen. So what goes on the media is the police lose a grenade launcher.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's actually what it is. I mean, I could put, I suppose, grenades in that thing and shoot grenades. I don't have grenades. We use it for foam rounds, like as an impact device, so that the guy with a knife, I don't have to shoot him with a real bullet. I can shoot him with the foam round and incapacitate him, and then take him into custody without him dying.
Yeah,
but that's a militarized thing. It's derided in the public discourse. I think, again, without context.
Yeah, and I think people just get either people come at this like in two ways. Is one is either ignorance, and then they just bite on to whatever's being said out there, the headlines, the clickbait, all that stuff. The other side is, for some reason, they've got a bone to pick with law enforcement and see that as maybe a career in just going after law enforcement, when end of the day, the big difference between the military and the police is, the policy and the procedures and the things we do and the reasons we do it for. Also, I think maybe people should, for context, compare like the Canadian military to the U.S. military. Very different, and the Canadian military is like mostly humanitarian missions. So, is being compared to the military really a bad thing? I don't see it as that. So maybe the context is completely missing from these arguments. But just kind of on the standardization stuff, and something you brought up a bit earlier was how it's more violent in the U.S. And one of the points I wrote down here, just in preparation for having this talk, was something, maybe there's more SWAT in the U.S. due to a few things. One is population density. Another thing I was kind of looking at in the stats and different things was the higher crime rates, and then also culture. And with each one of those points, just kind of fleshing those out, I was thinking like, well, population density, from anything I've read, generally you have more crime, more people living on top of each other. There's more human interactions. If I just live in a field by myself and nobody's around, like Canada's a very vast country, way less dense. People just come across each other less. You see higher crime in cities than on some rural back road. So maybe that leads to more crime. Higher crime rates you might tend to see some more violence. And then also the culture down there, their culture is built on being rebels, right? The whole country was born out of a rebellion, whereas Canada kind of ho-hummed our way into quasi-independence and stuff. So I think there's a lot more context that people are missing when they take those simple 1 or 2 line arguments and try to say, we treat groups of people the same way as they've been treated in the U.S., whether we're militarizing the police for whatever reason. I think people are missing the greater argument, and whether that's out of laziness or they, like I said, have a bone to pick and want to spin things. So what are your kind of thoughts on maybe that? Sorry, it was a big long rant, but just the more violence kind of comes out of those different things. So population density, higher crime, and culture, leading to us maybe needing more of a militarization aspect.
Yeah. So the interesting thing with my interaction with the U.S. agencies is that you have a very broad spectrum of SWAT capability. So you've got some teams on the upper end of the spectrum that are just phenomenal, incredibly professional, and any city would be lucky to have them. I give you some names like LAPD SWAT. LAPD SWAT, every one of their operators is also a trained negotiator.
Wow.
No, I don't know many teams that have that. Like they just run a great program. Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, their Special Enforcement Bureau, fantastic. Pros. Miami-Dade, incredible. FBI Hostage Rescue Team on the federal, incredible. Like there's all these teams that are just, frankly, outstanding. And but you have the other spectrum. So you have those small agencies who want to have their own team. It's like, you've got 30 guys, 30 police officers total in your agency. How are you going to have 12 on your team? And how much training can you afford them? I was recently on a course with 30 American agencies, and I was shocked at the number of agencies whose SWAT teams get less than 8 hours of training a month.
Wow. So
our training standard is probably around 50 to 60 hours a month. Mm-hmm. And most full-time teams would be at least, the minimum, the industry standard is 40 if you want to be an upper tier team. How do you get operational competence at that level? And the answer is you don't. Like, don't get me wrong, there's probably some squared away teams who, and these officers, like, they want to do a good job. They're probably great officers, but when you're when you're not given the equipment or the time to hone the skills, no one can be good, right?
Yeah.
And if you want to read a great book about this, I would suggest reading Radley Balco's book, Rise of the Warrior Cop. So that book came very, very popular right after Ferguson, Missouri, and it's all about the militarization of police. And when you read it, it is just a litany of deployments gone bad. So deploying SWAT teams for a barbering without a license incident, or doing a dynamic drug hit on a place without having any surveillance beforehand. So you don't see that the suspect actually isn't there, but another family is visiting. And so when you throw your flashbang in through the window, it lands in the visiting baby's crib, and you get the baby boo-boo incident, which you can look up online. You can find it. When you read his book, you're like, you kind of got to go, he kind of has a point,
Yeah.
And in Canada, because our policing is structured differently, we tend not to have as many outliers. Look, there are some agencies in Canada that, by virtue of their geography, have no other option but to try to support a part-time SWAT program with very limited resources. And they do it as professionally as they can. Are they going to be the same as, Edmonton's team? No, they are not. And is that going to probably result someday in a bad outcome? Well, it certainly could. But generally, we have greater standardization of standards. And like you said, I think, I was talking to an American friend of mine. I was trying to explain to him. He's like, well, what do you mean you do city policing? You're a federal agency. I'm like, yeah, we do federal, provincial, and municipal policing. And I'm like, can you imagine the FBI, being your state police and your city police force, like a federal agency? And again, it's that, I don't know if we call it a distrust of the federal government, but they certainly want to see a greater separation between levels of government. He's like, that's insane. That would never fly. I'm like, you're right. But there's advantages to it. Like, you get a certain economy of scale that comes with it.
Yeah.
There's huge advantages.
Yeah. And this kind of runs into previous conversations I've had with people from the U.S. About not even just policing, but just their media or how they do things in general. And they play in like 90-10 and their goalposts, whereas Canada's like 60-40. We like to just kind of play like a soft middle ground here. They just go to the extremes, right? And like you're saying, there's that distrust. So it's like, no, we're all going to have our own SWAT teams and do what we want because I don't trust the next guy. So yeah, I mean, you get kind of that variation in everything. And on
before you go on,
yeah,
you talk about media. There's an important thing to understand about media, is that the stories we read in the media are not necessarily reflective of actual public opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes they are, the most fringe element of that. And I'll give you an example. So we read in the media all the time. So every time a police agency buys a new armored vehicle, you read about it in the media. Oh, like, this is awful and they shouldn't be doing that. And da-da-da. Okay, take that armored vehicle, go to the gas station and fill it up with gas. I've done this, literally done this. Everyone comes up to you.
Yeah.
Oh, that thing's so cool. That's awesome. What is that? They love it. But it's always that, the vocal fringe opinion that gets the most attention. I have a great story about this. We had to go over to a community called Seashell for a suicide. There's a guy suicidal, poor guy. He's armed with a rifle, called 911, said what he was going to do. But he was armed with a rifle, and you don't know what people are going to do, right? Sometimes they don't want to do it themselves. So they'll try and position the police in such a way that the police have to do it for them, and bad things can happen. So you have to approach this with caution. So the detachment called us to respond to the call. We had to take the ferry over. At the time, our uniforms were like a multicam, like a disrupted camouflage pattern. We've since switched just straight green, but at the time that was.
Mm-hmm. And
we brought our armored vehicle with us because the guy's armed. Unfortunately, we found him deceased, and we couldn't do anything because it was already happened by the time we got there. On the way back, we're waiting for the ferry to go back, and so we're eating ice cream cones, and kids are climbing on the armored vehicle.
Yeah,
we get back, and there's a complaint lodged, and the complaint is lodged with the commanding officer saying, that the police took over essentially invaded the island and took over the ferry terminal and was intimidating everybody. And so the commanding officer is telling me this. I'm like, hey, you want to see a picture? And I show him a picture of the team literally eating ice cream cones with kids on the armored vehicle. But that story doesn't get told. Of the 100 people waiting for the ferry, it's the one guy in the corner just glowering at the police, being all mad, right? That becomes the narrative.
Yep.
And it's not close. So I always read these things. I'm like, I don't think that's what my neighbor thinks. I don't think that's what my kids' friends' parents think. I just don't. I don't run across it a whole lot.
Yeah, and you know what? If anything, my own experience has been my neighbors ask more questions because they're actually genuinely curious, and they'll bring up media things and be like, "I don't see how that's even possible." I'm like, "Well, even a normal day to day person can see that, see through that." So you're not wrong. I think people definitely. I know a lot of cops don't watch the news anymore for those exact reasons. So.
Yeah. Well, what does it say? The media sells opinions, not information, something like that.
So one of the things I wanted to kind of get to when you're talking about the armored car, especially, was the equipment, acquisition of the equipment that you use and the difference that you mentioned here in this paper. So can you talk a bit about how Canadian services get those armored vehicles, and then what it's like in the U.S. for them with these surplus transitions and grants?
Yeah. So at the time we wrote it, this was certainly under a lot of scrutiny. And I think it's changed, kind of swung back and forth depending who's sitting in the big chair down there. But down in the States, they had a thing called the 1033 program. And they still actually have a lot of federal grants. So any agency, regardless of size, can apply for surplus military equipment. Again, asterisk, I don't know if this is still true, but it certainly was a few years ago. Small agencies can also apply for federal grants. So if you go on, the leading armored vehicle manufacturer website, like right on the front page is a click here for grant information and assistance. Like they have someone whose job it is to help agencies write for federal grants. The result of this is a lot of these small agencies we're talking about, the ones with less than 50 officers, less than 25 officers, less than 10 officers, can get an armored vehicle. So, and that kind of gives them the capacity to have a SWAT team, right? It removes the barrier to entry to the SWAT game. It makes it very low entry. Now, people like to complain about the small agency having the MRAP until there's a flood, and that's what they're using to rescue people. Then no one seems to mind. But by and large, that was the big focus of a lot of the media attention, was these armored vehicles. In Canada, we do used to be able to get some surplus military vehicles, but we don't want them anymore because there's commercially available products that suit our needs much better. So there's a few agencies that still have, the old Grizzlies or Cougars. We got a couple in our parking lot that we're working on getting rid of because we just don't use them anymore because they're not great. They don't do the job we need them to do. But it was very rare even to begin with to get those. That meant that police agencies had to buy their own. That meant, these things cost, now $500,000. So we have a much higher barrier to entry into the SWAT game in Canada than the United States. So now that means that SWAT in Canada in general, again, there's a few exceptions, is limited to the larger agencies. Or because of the cost of it, agencies have to look for an economy of scale. So they amalgamate their SWAT program with other nearby jurisdictions and they share those resources. This has a pretty big impact on the ability of small agencies to have SWAT teams, because there's a certain culture in SWAT teams for sure. And I think it's less so now, but it used to be a pretty aggressive mindset. I would be cautious in allowing such an aggressive mindset to propagate throughout an entire agency. Like if 40% of your agency is SWAT members and you're giving them all that training, if you're not properly counteracting that with expectations of professionalism, de-escalation training, like the LAPD SWAT model is a fantastic example of that, I think you're asking for trouble. The other thing is, if half your agency is on the SWAT team, what are your standards to get in? So there's agencies in the States, 17% of teams in the States don't even have a physical standard for their SWAT teams.
Wow.
There isn't even a physical standard. Now, I'm not saying a physical standard is like, the two of the best teams in the world that I know of actually don't have physical standards.
Oh, really?
But to get on they do, but ongoing they don't. But they have a culture of team accountability and a culture of excellence where you would not dream of being unfit. One of the teams, they're a European team. They look like they all come out of a test tube. They're terrifying. They're all like 6 foot. I'll put it this way. We're training with, I think there were 6 of them. One of them was an ex-Olympic athlete in track cycling, and I couldn't tell which one he was. Like someone's like, one of those guys went to the Olympics. I can't tell who like they all look like they could go to the Olympics for that. So it's not a guarantee, but if you have no physical standards, or some of the standards we see is like a mile and a half run in 18 minutes or something, or 15, like what?
They
Like,
should do it in half that time.
yeah, maybe half might be a little ambitious, but yeah, I mean, you like if half your agency's on the team, what are your training standards? What are your performance standards? You're not going to be able to enforce anything because there's too much. Yeah, so I think it's a dangerous thing, and it has downsides. There's advantages. You're talking about that gap between patrol and SWAT. If you have your own team and there's always someone working that has that training, there are advantages. We can't pretend there's not.
Yeah. Well, and maybe that, just for time's sake here, maybe that brings me on to one of the other things I wanted to get to was a post that you had on LinkedIn. This is where I see most of your work. So it was a posting here about policies, procedures, and training. And then I'll kind of read this, and then I'll read your response. And it just has to essentially do with policy replacing training. So this was a post by Paul Taylor. It says he's an assistant professor. I don't know what, but his stuff was really good. So it says basically, policies, procedures, and training are how administrators, managers, and trainers, no matter how experienced they are, imagine high-risk, complex work is or should be done from positions that are insulated from the risks, complexities, and uncertainties of the work itself. Workers must translate and transfer the abstract, overly simplistic, linear, and incomplete policies, procedures, and training of imagined work to the complex, high-risk, unpredictable problems of actual work in order to achieve good outcomes. So just kind of like a summary of that is policy and procedure are administrators imagining how a high-risk, complex event is maybe handled. Then the frontline person has to translate that to that actual complex, high-risk thing in front of them and achieve a good outcome. Your response, I thought, was awesome. I immediately screenshotted this and saved it just for this conversation. Was you said, I think these dangers are particularly acute when police agencies try to use policy as a replacement to training, especially when that policy keeps getting more and more restrictive to try to prevent the previous bad thing that happened. So kind of what I saw from that was you're essentially removing the officer's ability to think critically on the fly and in dynamic environments. Is that kind of what you were going for with that? And can you talk a bit about this policy replacing training?
Yeah, well, we talked earlier about how expensive it is to train people, right? So if I'm an administrator, what's the easiest way for me, to try to make you to do the job properly next time? It's not to offer training, that's expensive. It's to write a new policy and then email that policy out. And I think it's a really bad habit because, our policies then, what did I read? Someone commented, I think it might even been on the same thread, where something like, policies are meant to be guardrails, not railroad tracks, right? It's not the track you go on. It's the track it's the guardrails where you don't go, off-road right on. It keeps you on track a little bit. And yeah, I mean, the complexity of environment that we deal with is just no one is going to be able to recall all the 10-step procedures for this thing and 20-step procedures for that thing. I mean, humans just don't work that way. So I see it very often that, some bad thing will happen. And it's like, that bad thing might never happen again. But, it was a real outlier event.
Yeah.
And then we start creating restrictive policy for outlier events. And you start painting yourself in a corner because, when I'm on the road, I have to think of the 10 different policy pieces on impaired driving that happen that, might not apply. That just makes a mess of everything. Just, I don't know, teach people to do the job right, teach them what the fundamental concepts are, and then train them to and give them experience applying those in a broad context. You'll be fine.
Well, and if somebody makes a mistake, like a genuine mistake, they're not out there being malicious, and, you go basically, I don't know if it's like you have to punish them. I don't want to say punish, but obviously there's some consequences for your actions, whatever they might be, but give that person more training then, right? And I could see this again, like get out and people go, well, somebody messes up and you're rewarding them with training. It's like, no, I don't think they need to be fired, and I want them to do better next time. I want them to succeed. So let's give them the proper tools so that that event doesn't happen again, right? But then to go create policy is that blanket on everybody. Now everybody's got to kind of wear that because you're saying, well, nobody's allowed to do this now, or we're changing these things. So everybody has to ask permission next time. It's like, well, maybe everybody already knew that or would have acted differently given the set of circumstances. But I see these policies that come out. We have a lot of things with like criminal flights. So when a car takes off, there's a lot of restrictions around what you can and can't do. But you start to get management, and I'll say management intentionally, not leadership. Management will just fall back to policy and say, oh, can't do this. So just, nobody do anything. And it's like, well, that's not the right way to handle things. We can't use policy and procedure as a crutch. Like you're saying, it's a guidelines. You still have to, if you want to be in those positions of leadership, you have to be able to make decisions at critical times. Sometimes you're going to be wrong and you own that, but it still doesn't mean that you just use it as a crutch and just say, we never do anything. And look, everybody survived at the end of the day. It's like, well, if everybody's just getting away with everything, that's not really good either. So,
okay, man, there's a lot to unpack on this.
yeah.
So first of all, I think some managers and executive feel like policy gives them protection.
Mm-hmm.
Because if, let's say I'm the boss and you're the constable and I say, you can't do X, Y, and Z, I can just kind of brush my hands and say, well, if he does it, that's on him. The organization will be protected because he's the one who broke the rules. That is an illusion of protection. It's a false sense of security, because if I haven't trained you not to chase the car in circumstances that you're not supposed to, and you go chase the car in circumstances that you're not supposed to, I'm still, as the employer, vicariously liable for your actions.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't actually protect me at all if I just, put this policy down and not train you to carry it out properly. And that's what we see. We see it all the time. So what happens is you go and chase the car that you're not supposed to. So I now revamp my policy and make it a little more restrictive and a little more restrictive. Now, that said, I would say that it is absolutely within the purview of, the police chief or the police board or whoever to come up with policies. Hey, what do we think is a good risk proposition on chases, on pursuits, for instance? We know that, people without driver's license, like 14-year-old kids without driver's license, will take off from the police and just drive crazy until they get into a car crash. We also know that, drug dealers will just take off if we have a no chase policy. People the real criminals will also stop chasing. And then sometimes they hit innocent people. It is, in fact, the chief's job to weigh that and say, hey, this is how I view, this is how I weigh it out. And this is the why I'm putting this policy in place. And I think you have to sell it to the front line very carefully.
Yeah.
Because it can never be about, me restricting your actions, right? Like that can't be how, or it's, like, hey, this is going to be your fault if it happens, or I'm just protecting myself. The way I say policy is, guys, policy is a shield. It's a shield that I'm putting out, and it's to protect you. But it only helps if you're behind it. If you're out over there outside the protection of the shield, I'm not going to be able to help you. I can't give you top cover. My job is to give you top cover. If you abide by the policy, I can give you top cover all day long. If you don't, I'm going to be very limited in the protection I can afford you. So when you put like the reason we have these no pursuit policies is, here's the example. Here's the case where it resulted in lawsuits. Here's in the cases where it resulted in police officers going to jail for criminal negligence. And I don't want that to happen to you. And so here's the limits that we have prescribed. I think if you do it that way, it's a much more palatable than just saying you're not allowed to do this anymore. Email out the new emergency vehicle operations procedure 3.7 says, everyone sign this. So now if you chase someone, you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah, you get more buy-in.
It doesn't help anyone. yeah, you get more buy-in.
Yeah. Well,
And that's the other thing about policy is policy can give you a guaranteed minimum performance, but it cannot deliver high performance. Well, let's revisit physical standards. If I went out to my team and said, guys, the new physical standards, you have to run a mile and a half in 9 minutes. Well, some of the guys are going to pass, some of the guys are going to fail. Like 9-minute mile and a half, that's a very high performance. But I can't mandate that because, Jimmy, the power lifter, isn't going to run a mile and a half in 9 minutes.
mm-hmm.
So you need to have but I can guarantee a minimum performance. So I can say your mile and a half has to be 11 minutes. It can guarantee a minimum performance to have that accountability. You'll never get high performance from policy. You can't mandate it. It's got to be culture. So now we have, team accountability. Hey, which platoon can have the lowest mile and a half average?
Mm-hmm.
Now they're going to start training. So that's what, the high caliber teams I've talked about before who don't actually have written standards still get that incredible performance. So I think it goes the same with everything. It's like you can set the low bar, but you want high bar performance, and you can't do that through policy. But we see that's what agencies try to do because it's much easier. They think it's the easy way. It's the impossible way.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. I think it's a good answer. So I want to make sure I give you opportunity to let people know how they can follow you and your work. So where can people find you?
Yeah. So probably the best place right now is on LinkedIn. So it's just Kevin Cyr, CYR, the guy in green, the bald guy in green is my profile picture. And I just kind of like to write about current events, leadership, decision-making. Sometimes I have cool SWAT videos that I think are fun. And it's nothing special, but if you're looking for me, that's where I am.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on today. If you hang on the line for 2 seconds, I'll stop the recording. But yeah, thank you for being here.
All right. Thanks very much for having me.